It's 2 in the afternoon. You've been at your desk since morning. You haven't done anything particularly demanding, and yet your head feels like it's full of wet sand. Thinking requires effort that doesn't match the task. You reread the same sentence twice and absorb it less the second time. A decision that should take 30 seconds takes 3 minutes because your brain keeps sliding off it. You get up to get water and stand in the kitchen for a moment, trying to remember why you came. You go back to the desk. You stare at the screen. The work is there. The capacity to do it feels like it went somewhere else without telling you. And the strange part is that this is a normal Tuesday. Nothing went wrong today. You slept a reasonable number of hours. You haven't been through anything dramatic. There's no obvious justification for the level of depletion you're feeling, and that absence of justification makes it worse, because it takes away the clean story. You can't say you're tired because of a hard week or a difficult situation. You're just tired. Again. Still. Always. At some point in the day. This particular kind of tired that has nothing to do with your body, and everything to do with whatever is happening inside your head. This is mental fatigue. Not the theatrical kind, not the kind that comes with a diagnosis, but the ordinary, daily, persistent kind that millions of people experience as their normal baseline, so consistently that most of them have stopped expecting to feel different. They've accepted it as a feature of being a functioning adult in the modern world. A cost of entry, something to be managed with caffeine and willpower until the day ends and they can finally stop. The idea that it could be substantially different, that the thickness in the head and the slowness in the thinking, and the effort required to do simple things might actually be reducible, seems almost naive, because it's been this way for so long. But mental fatigue at this level, the constant, chronic, structurally embedded kind, is not inevitable. It's not just the price of having a demanding life. It's the predictable output of specific conditions. Conditions that the modern world creates almost automatically, that almost nobody examines because they feel so normal, and that respond meaningfully to changes that don't require a personality transplant or a dramatic lifestyle overhaul. Understanding those conditions is the starting point. And the starting point begins not with what you're doing wrong, but with understanding what your brain is actually doing all day, at a level most people never consider. Your brain is not a passive receiver of your day. It's an active processor, constantly evaluating, deciding, categorizing, monitoring, and responding, not just when you're engaged in something you'd call work, but continuously, in the background, through every waking hour. Every piece of information you encounter requires some processing, even information you're consuming passively. Every decision you make, no matter how small, draws on a shared pool of cognitive resources. Every emotional experience, every social interaction, every moment of uncertainty or unresolved tension, places a demand on the systems responsible for managing your internal state. These systems are genuinely biological. They consume genuine resources. And those resources are finite within any given period. They replenish during rest, but only when rest is actually restorative, which is a condition that modern life makes surprisingly difficult to meet. The reason most people experience mental fatigue as constant rather than episodic is that they are depleting this pool continuously and replenishing it inadequately. Every single day, creating a running deficit that accumulates across weeks and months until what used to be the low point of the day becomes the permanent baseline. The tiredness isn't new each day. It's carried forward from the day before and the day before that, layering invisibly until it feels structural, until it feels like you. This is where things get strange. The biggest contributors to mental fatigue in modern life are almost never the things people identify as the problem. People blame their job, their commute, their schedule, the big demands, and those things matter. But the more significant depletion, in most cases, comes from sources that feel like nothing, sources that don't register as work at all while they're happening. The continuous low-level processing of digital information is one of the most significant. Scrolling through a feed looks like doing nothing. You're lying on the couch, you're relaxed. Nothing is being asked of you. But your brain is evaluating dozens of images, headlines, opinions, emotional signals, and social cues per minute, generating small reactions to each, comparing, categorizing, and discarding them in rapid succession. This is not rest. This is processing at high volume and low depth, which is one of the most cognitively expensive modes the brain operates in, because it requires constant reorientation without ever reaching the kind of sustained engagement that produces the sense of completion. You process 100 things and finish none of them. The cost is real, the output is invisible, and because it feels like leisure, the cost never gets attributed correctly. The second major hidden source is unresolved decisions. Every open loop in your mental environment, every task you've said you'll do but haven't done, every decision you've been meaning to make but are postponing, every conversation you know you need to have but are avoiding, occupies background cognitive bandwidth. Not consciously, not in a way you'd notice unless you looked for it. But the brain holds these open items in a kind of active maintenance state, keeping them accessible in case you need to act on them, spending small amounts of processing continuously to ensure they aren't forgotten. The more open loops you carry, the more background processing is running, and background processing competes directly with foreground capacity. People who feel mentally foggy and can't identify why often have dozens of unresolved items living in their mental environment, collectively producing a drain that makes clear thinking feel harder and more effortful than it should. This explains why simply completing something, even a small thing, that was sitting undone, often produces a disproportionate feeling of mental relief. It's not the task that was exhausting you, it was the open loop. Closing it releases the background processing that was maintaining it. The brain has a little more space. Thinking feels incrementally clearer. Multiply that across a dozen closed loops, and the cumulative relief is significant. The third source is decision volume, and this one is particularly invisible because individual decisions feel trivial. What to eat, what to watch, which message to reply to first, whether to respond to this notification now or later, which option to choose from the 17 available. Each of these feels like nothing. Collectively, they constitute a staggering cognitive load. The brain processes decisions through a system that has limited daily capacity, and that system doesn't distinguish between an important decision and a trivial one in terms of the resources it draws on. A morning of small low-stakes decisions depletes the same pool as a morning of significant ones. And the modern environment is saturated with micro-decisions in a way that has no historical precedent. Every app, every platform, every service presents choices that require evaluation and selection, framed in ways designed to maximize engagement, which means designed to generate exactly the kind of low-level cognitive effort that accumulates into afternoon fatigue. People who simplify aggressively, who reduce the number of daily decisions that require fresh evaluation by using defaults, routines, and consistently report greater mental clarity and energy than people with equivalent workloads but higher decision volumes. This isn't because they're smarter or more disciplined, it's because they're protecting cognitive resources by removing the small draws that would otherwise deplete them before the day's real demands arrive. The fourth source is the one people find most surprising, and it's the cost of social monitoring in a continuously connected environment. Human beings are deeply social, and the brain allocates significant resources to tracking the social environment, interpreting other people's responses, managing how we're perceived, and processing the emotional content of our relationships. In a world where you had social contact with a small, stable group of people and limited communication outside of face-to-face interaction, this system ran at a sustainable level. In a world where you're in partial social contact with dozens or hundreds of people simultaneously through messaging and social media, where you're continuously aware of how your posts are performing, how people are responding to your messages, whether you've replied to everything you're expected to reply to, and how your life compares to what's visible around you. This system runs at a level of continuous activation that it was not designed for. The depletion is real, even when the individual social interactions feel minor or even pleasant. The cumulative monitoring load is significant, and it runs throughout the day, in the background of everything else you're doing. What most people miss is how much the evening perpetuates the next day's fatigue, not just through inadequate sleep duration, but through the content and quality of the hours immediately before sleep. The brain needs a transition period to downshift from the activation state of the day into the deeper restoration state that allows sleep to be genuinely restorative. When the hours before sleep are filled with emotionally activating content, social monitoring, information processing, and unresolved tension, the transition is blocked or abbreviated. Sleep arrives eventually because biology is powerful, but it arrives in a nervous system that never fully downshifted, and the deeper restorative phases are shorter or less complete as a result. You wake with a partial deficit that accumulates across nights, producing the experience of sleeping and still feeling tired, which is one of the defining features of chronic mental fatigue. Understanding all of this changes what reducing mental fatigue actually looks like. Because the real causes are not the big, obvious stressors. They're the accumulated weight of 100 small, invisible loads, each of which feels like nothing, but none of which is nothing. And the interventions that actually work are not the dramatic ones. They're the small structural changes that reduce the invisible loads before they accumulate. Closing open loops matters more than most people expect. Not all at once, not perfectly, but creating a regular practice of identifying the items that are sitting unresolved in your mental environment and either completing them, deciding not to do them, or capturing them reliably outside your head in a system you trust, reduces the background processing load in a way that creates real cognitive space. The brain stops spending resources maintaining items you've externalized. The mental environment gets quieter. Clarity improves not because you did anything impressive, but because you stopped carrying something you weren't even aware you were carrying. Reducing decision volume in areas that don't matter to you is a practical and underrated intervention. When you eat the same breakfast most mornings, you haven't lost anything meaningful, and you've removed a small cognitive draw from the part of the day when your resources are freshest. When you have a default structure for the beginning of your workday, rather than deciding fresh each morning what to do first, you arrive at your most important work without having already spent capacity on orientation. These aren't lifestyle statements, they're resource management, applied to the most finite and most important resource you have. The transition between the day and sleep deserves specific attention. Not as a rigid ritual, but as a genuine commitment to reducing input in the final 90 minutes before sleep. Not perfectly, not every night, but as a consistent enough practice that the nervous system begins to associate that window with the beginning of its downshift rather than with continued activation. The quality of sleep that follows genuine downshifting is different at the level that matters. Deeper, more restorative, more effective at clearing the accumulated metabolic and cognitive residue of the day. And the mornings that follow those nights feel meaningfully different from the mornings that follow nights of scrolling until your eyes close. And perhaps most importantly, the relationship between stimulation and recovery needs to be genuinely re-examined. Rest that involves continuous passive consumption is not cognitive recovery. It's a different kind of processing, lower intensity but still processing, and it doesn't provide the conditions under which the brain's maintenance and restoration systems operate. Genuine cognitive recovery requires genuine low stimulation periods, moments without input, without social monitoring, without content to evaluate. These moments feel uncomfortable, especially when you've been in high stimulation mode for a long time. The restlessness that arrives in genuine quiet is real, and it passes if you don't relieve it. And what follows it is something most people haven't felt in a while: actual mental stillness. The quiet inside your head that isn't emptiness, but space. The feeling of being genuinely present without effort, because the processing load has actually reduced rather than just shifted. The mental fatigue you carry is not your personality. It's not evidence of weakness or a sign that you're not built for the demands of your life. It's the predictable output of specific conditions operating in a specific environment, producing a specific kind of depletion that feels constant because the conditions that create it have been constant. Change the conditions, and the output changes. Not all at once, not overnight, but measurably, cumulatively, in a direction that eventually produces mornings that feel like actual mornings, rather than extensions of the day before. Your mind, given the right conditions, is capable of a clarity you may not have experienced in years. Not because something needs to be added to it, because something has been continuously drawn from it, and the drawing finally needs to stop. If this felt familiar, comment mental fatigue. It helps me know this is something more people are silently dealing with.